I think that it's hers to lose, as in, I think that she's on an inertia that she'll win unless there's an eruption in her party, unless there are people who want to stab her in her back. And I'm worried that there are some people who resent her coming in as the premier, as an outsider, as too libertarian, as too critical of Jason Kenney. And they might rather lose the election and get rid of Danielle Smith than win under her. Is that too crazy?
No, it's entirely true. In fact, I think Jason Kenney probably even fits in that mold. Jason Kenney, I've never seen before in any party, in any province, the sitting head of a government criticizing the front runner of the leadership race to replace them.
And then refusing to be part of a transition. Like, he refused to be like that. I've never heard of. Like, it's one thing to be partisan in your party, but to say, I hate my successor so much, I literally will not help them become premier. That's unheard of.
You'll remember, you see the Libranos poster from the old Western Centre when you ran it there. Jean Chrétien and Paul Martin hated each other's guts. If they could have gotten away with it, they would have shot each other. But, when Paul Martin was running to succeed Jean Chrétien stayed out of the leadership race, at least publicly. I mean, everyone's got a private favorite. You might, call in some favors and pull some strings here and there, but you never got directly involved. Jason Kenney was directly involved in that leadership on an almost daily basis, going almost exclusively after Danielle Smith, which he saw, I think, as a threat to his legacy, which had been pretty much defined by lockdowns and mandates and things like that. And he was making government spending announcements literally the day of the leadership vote. So by that evening, his successor will be selected. It was assumed to likely be Danielle Smith. That morning, he was making spending announcements in the same damn city, trying to take the spotlight. So, you had the most chaotic transition I've ever seen in government. There's generally two kinds of transitions in Canadian or Westminster governments. You have the one most people are aware of is when one party defeats another in an election. So, UCP defeats NDP. Well, the NDP, the government will take normally 3 to 5 weeks for transition. The old government goes into caretaker mode. They're not allowed to make decisions. They're just kind of there to make sure that the police still arrest bad guys and the fires get put out. They don't do anything and they assist in transition. And there's no expectations on the new government because they're not actually sworn in yet, because they're not technically the government until they're sworn in. And that's what a lot of people see. And then there's internal transitions. You saw this really recently in BC, where the new NDP leader was elected to replace Adrian Dix. And they took 2 months, a very long transition. It was within the same party, but it was a new administration coming in. They took lots of time, and the new premier could hit the ground running. Here, Smith, I think, felt the necessity of taking power immediately because Jason Kenney was not acting as a caretaker interim premier. He was acting as a very hostile premier and going to govern in his own right until he was gone. So Danielle Smith, I think, won the leadership on a Thursday night. Monday morning, she was sworn in as premier. And the rest of her cabinet wasn't even sworn in for a month. She essentially just fired Jason Kenney from the cabinet and took his job. And that resulted in a very chaotic turnover. You had no premier's office. You had a premier, but no real premier's office. You just had kind of her campaign staff trying to pick up the pieces. But all of a sudden, because she's premier, there's an expectation from the media and the opposition that they're going to govern as the premier, even without any of the infrastructure. So it was a very chaotic transition of government. It's kind of a third kind that I've never even seen before. Even when you have a hostile new leader replacing a hostile old leader like Jean Chrétien and Paul Martin, you just never see that kind of thing. And I think it resulted in a pretty rough start for the government.
Yeah, I didn't realize it was that bad. There is one thing that usually works in Alberta, and it also works in Quebec, works in Newfoundland. I think it works in BC and Saskatchewan, and that is you can unite your province against Ottawa because Ottawa plays favorites. And, Westerners like to think that Ottawa plays favorites benefiting Quebec, but sometimes Quebecers feel misunderstood or threatened in some way. I think Alberta has a legitimate claim, and Newfoundland does too. I think the best moments of Danielle Smith have been when she pushes back at Justin Trudeau, when she challenges his goofy concept of a just transition off of oil and gas. And when they met a few weeks ago, and she was very reluctant to shake his hand. I know a lot of people on Twitter chirped about that and thought it looked childish. I really liked it. I mean, it was a little bit passive aggressive, but I think it telegraphed to Albertans, I don't like this guy, unlike my opponent. Here, just take a quick look at that awkward half handshake. Take a look.
That's the big one. Yeah. Here, let's please have a seat.
People thought that looked small-minded or petty. I thought, no, that's an expression of Alberta's views towards Trudeau. Am I right on that? I think almost any quarrel that the Premier of Alberta has with Justin Trudeau is going to be a winner. If you're talking about Trudeau as Alberta Premier, you are winning. If you're talking about healthcare or other more mundane matters, you may be losing, especially against an NDP. But you're fighting Trudeau, you're winning every day. What do you think?
Well, actually, on the handshake, we discussed it a lot around the newsroom here. I actually had a reporter ask, one of our reporters, Jonathan Bradley, I think, asked Premier Smith about that at a press conference when she got back. What she had said actually is that they had met before the cameras started clicking and all the press are in there. They had already met, they'd already been introduced and already shaken hands. And then, they walk up to the chairs and Trudeau puts his hand out to shake her hand again. And so she said she was just kind of confused by it. They had already said hello. They had already shaken hands and was just kind of confused by the kind of the stage.
So it wasn't as deliberate. It wasn't really a deliberate statement.
Yeah. I don't think it was. I think that's I think it was a fair explanation. Others had posited that Trudeau had just like grabbed her hand and kind of manhandled it. Like when he elbowed Ruth Ellen Brousseau, the MP, in the chest. I actually don't even think that either. I think it was just awkward because they'd already shaken hands and been introduced. It's like when you go for dinner with somebody and you say goodbye at the door of the restaurant and you turn out to walk the same direction down the sidewalk and you have an awkward second goodbye. I think it's probably an equivalent of that. So yeah, I think that's what it was. But to your larger point of is it good politics to fight Ottawa? Yeah, it generally is in Alberta and in many provinces. Less so Ontario because it kind of just sees itself as Upper Canada. Yeah. It's not really not as much a thing. But the caution is that it can't look like some contrived silly fight. It has to be genuine over an issue. It can't be. Every once in a while, like Rachel Notley would try to work herself up and do a tiff and say, Justin Trudeau is, could do better. And, people are like, I'm not really buying it. But conversely, if Danielle Smith, had a grievance, but Albertans weren't bought into it and they thought it was just for political show. Really, this was part of Jason Kenney's problem. He ran against Ottawa in the last election. He ran against Ottawa in the UCP leadership when he got made leader. And then he, for his roughly 3 years as premier, he would talk a game against Ottawa, but he never actually really did anything. And so talking against Ottawa can get you in office, but if you can't show anything for it, that you're actually willing to do something about it, it can be on the negative side. And that was, after his mandates and lockdowns and things like that, that was probably the clear second biggest reason why Jason Kenney lost the leadership of his own party. It was just a bad joke that he would write an angry letter and hold a press conference about Ottawa, but never actually did anything.
That was an excerpt from the Ezra Levant show. I'm Ezra Levant. Every weekday, I do a monologue about the topic of the day. Then I interview a fascinating guest either in studio or via Skype. And then I read your mail, whether it's fan mail or hate mail, which is sometimes even more interesting. This is on our premium service, though, called Rebel News Plus. Go to rebelnewsplus.com. It's $8 a month or less if you buy a whole year in advance. You get my show every weeknight, plus Sheila Gunn Reid's show every week. It's called The Gun Show. It's pretty amazing. We rely on you because we do not take a dime from the government. In Canada, that makes us almost unique. So please help us out and help yourself to some great journalism at rebelnewsplus.com.